Picture this. It's maybe 800 years after Christ, somewhere in coastal Norway, and the sky is that deep blue-black color you only get right before sunrise. Cold? Oh, it's cold. The kind of cold that makes you wonder how anyone lived through winters back then. And here's Astrid, pulling her woolen cloak tighter, stepping out of her longhouse into that pre-dawn darkness. Now, she's not grabbing a sword. She's not checking her shield. She's reaching for something else entirely, a carved yew-pole that's been in her family for generations. And when I say generations, I mean this thing has time's history asterisk. Her grandmother's grandmother carried this pole. Think about that for a second. We're talking about a piece of wood that's probably older than most churches in Europe at this time. But here's what gets me about this pole. It's covered in notches. 23 springs, 11 streams, 4 sacred pools. This isn't just some walking stick. This is a times map asterisk, a 3-dimensional database of every water source within a day's walk. And Astrid, like her mother before her and her mother before that, has memorized every single mark. Today's special, though. Today she's taking her daughter Thora on her first solo water-gathering journey. And before you think, oh, that's nice, a little family outing, no, this is serious business. This is a rite of passage. Think about how we mark adulthood in modern society: driver's licenses, graduations, first jobs. For Viking families, watching your daughter learn to gather water alone, that's up there with a warrior's first raid. I'm not exaggerating. The settlement Astrid lives in 37 families, maybe 150 to 200 people total, depends entirely on women like her. And here's the thing that modern people don't quite grasp. They have no wells. None. Zero. You might be thinking, why not just dig a well? Great question. The answer tells you everything about Viking life in these northern settlements. First, the ground. It's frozen solid for half the year. You try digging through permafrost with iron tools, actually. You know what? Don't try that. It's nearly impossible. And in summer, the ground's full of rock. We're talking about the Scandinavian Shield here, some of the oldest bedrock on Earth. You'd have better luck digging through concrete with a spoon. But there's another reason, and this one's fascinating. The old ways, the traditional beliefs that still dominate this world in 800. After Christ say that forcing water up from below brings curses. The spirits guard the underground rivers. You don't mess with that. You don't force water to do what it doesn't want to do naturally. So instead, you learn to work times with times the landscape, not against it. As mother and daughter head down the forest path, Astrid starts teaching. And listen to what she's teaching, because this is knowledge that's been refined over centuries. She's explaining how birdsong tells you which springs run pure. Certain birds won't sing near contaminated water. Is that folklore or observation? Probably both. And honestly, does it matter if it works? She teaches about the moon. Water gathered under a full moon keeps twice as long. Now, we know today that's probably because full moons provide more light for careful collection, reducing contamination. But the Vikings didn't need to understand the mechanism, they just needed the result. And the prayers. Astrid whispers prayers to Ran, the goddess of the drowned. Ran, who rules over those who die at sea, who commands the waters. You show respect. You acknowledge the power of water to give life or take it. These aren't just religious rituals, they're psychological frameworks for treating water collection with the seriousness it deserves. The buckets they carry, and I want you to really think about these buckets for a moment. They're not plastic containers. They're not light aluminum. These are wooden vessels, sealed with pine tar, bound with iron. Each one can hold 40 pounds of water when full. 40 pounds. That's like carrying a 5-year-old child in each hand. And this is Thora's future. This is what will shape her body, her posture, her strength. Look at paintings of Viking women. And you're looking at generations of women who carried 80 pounds of water across rough terrain multiple times per day. They reach the spring, and now Astrid teaches the really crucial stuff. How to read the water's surface for that rainbow sheen that means sickness, probably bacterial blooms or algae that indicate contamination. How to spot white clay deposits that naturally filter impurities. The Vikings didn't have microscopes, but they had centuries of observation and correlation between water sources and illness. And the offerings. Bread and silver left at the spring for the water spirits. This isn't superstition for its own sake, this is a community enforcement mechanism. If everyone knows the water, spirits demand respect. Everyone treats the water source carefully. Nobody contaminates it. Nobody overuses it. The supernatural belief creates real-world conservation. Here's what really strikes me. This exact scene is happening simultaneously across 10,000 Viking settlements. From Iceland, where people are living on what's essentially a volcanic rock in the North Atlantic, to the Ruslands, where Swedish Vikings have established trading posts along Russian rivers. Everywhere, women are doing what Astrid's doing. They're reading the land, they're finding water where men would walk right past it. They're memorizing patterns and teaching daughters and maintaining systems that keep entire communities alive. The men? The men sail for glory. They raid monasteries in England. They explore new lands. They fight wars and make alliances and get their names in sagas. And that's real. That happened. That matters. But while they're gone, and they're gone for months, sometimes years, women like Astrid are ensuring there's clean water. There's something to come home to. There's a functioning society. This is the thing about history that gets me every time. We know the names of jarls and kings. We can list Viking battles. But the women who spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of finding, collecting, filtering, and distributing water across some of the harshest terrain in Europe? We don't know most of their names. What we do know is this. They became masters of reading the land's hidden waters. They learned that survival doesn't come from forcing nature to your will. It comes from understanding where nature provides what you need. That knowledge becomes power in a world where military might gets all the attention, but daily survival determines who actually makes it through the winter. And as Astrid watches her daughter Thora carefully lower the bucket into the sacred spring for the first time, checking the water just as she was taught, making the proper offerings, treating the whole process with the reverence it deserves. This is the moment a new water guardian is born. One more link in a chain that stretches back generations and will continue forward into futures these women can't imagine. But right now, at this moment, in the growing light of this 8th century Norwegian morning, none of that matters, except the cold weight of water in wooden buckets and the long walk home. And the raiders are coming. They just don't know it yet. So we jump forward now, about 150 years. It's 950 after Christ. And something's changed in the Viking world. The settlements have gotten bigger. The populations have grown. And water, which was always important, has become absolutely critical. Because here's the thing about resources. When they're abundant, nobody fights over them. But when they get scarce, that's when things get interesting. Enter Gudrun Ironkettle. And let me tell you, that name wasn't given lightly. You might think it's because she's a good cook. You'd be wrong. Gudrun earned that name in the drought of 943, and the story of what happened tells you everything about how Viking women's relationship with water has evolved. Hedeby, eastern Denmark, major trading centre. And during this drought, and we're talking about a serious drought, the kind that turns streams into muddy trickles and makes springs disappear entirely, tensions are running high. Gudrun's family has ancestral rights to the eastern springs. These rights go back generations, probably to the founding of the settlement. They're not written down anywhere, but everyone knows them. Everyone respects them. Until they don't. Raiders from a rival settlement decide that ancestral rights don't matter when your children are thirsty. They're coming to take those springs by force. And here's where it gets fascinating. Because Gudrun doesn't call for the men are gone, half of them are. Trading in Ruslands, the others are raiding in Francia. This is a women's problem, and Gudrun is going to solve it with women's methods. She organizes 32 women. Think about that number. 32 women, most of them mothers, some of them grandmothers, a few younger ones who've just started their water-carrying duties. And Gudrun teaches them something that probably would have made their warrior husbands proud. She teaches them to fight with their water-carrying poles. These aren't little sticks, remember. These poles are sturdy enough to help balance 80 pounds of water across rough terrain. In the right hands, they're essentially quarterstaffs. But here's the brilliant part. Gudrun doesn't actually want to fight. She wants to make fighting so unappealing that nobody tries. She posts lookouts at every approach to their streams. She has her water guard visible, standing shoulder to shoulder at the water's edge, and she has them polish their iron kettles, the ones they usually use for heating water, until they gleam like shields in the sunlight. The raiders arrive, and they see what's waiting for them. 32 determined women. No gaps in the line, weapons ready. And the message is clear. You want this water. You're going to have to fight for every drop. You're going to have to hurt these women, maybe kill some of them. And then what? You think their husbands are going to let that slide when they return? You think you won't start a blood feud that'll last 3 generations? Not a drop of blood gets shed. The raiders leave, and Gudrun Iron Kettle becomes a legend. But here's what I find even more interesting than that confrontation. Violence like this is rare. Really rare. Because Viking women have developed something far more sophisticated than warfare over water. They've developed politics. Meet Ingrid of Uppsala. Ingrid doesn't carry a weapon. What she carries is infinitely more powerful. She carries a mental map of water debts and alliances that span 3 generations. And when I say map, I mean she knows without writing anything down who can draw from which stream on which days, which families share rain collection rights during the wet season, whose daughters are allowed to learn the secret locations of emergency water caches hidden for siege times. These agreements never get written down. Can't write them down. Really, most women can't write in 950 after Christ, but they don't need to. They pass this information through wedding songs, through weaving patterns, through the stories mothers tell daughters while they're working. And what emerges is essentially a shadow government run entirely by women, operating parallel to but completely separate from the male-dominated thing assemblies where official decisions get made. Here's my favorite example of how this works. Thorstein Bloodaxe, and yes, that's really what he calls himself, is besieging a rival Jarl's hall. It's been 40 days. 40 days without resupply. And Thorstein is getting frustrated because the defenders should have run out of clean water weeks ago. How are they still holding out? What Thorstein doesn't know, what he can't know, because he's never paid attention to women's work, is that his own wife has been smuggling information to her besieged sister. Information about hidden springs, about emergency water sources. The method? Symbols woven into cloth that gets traded between settlements. To anyone who doesn't know what to look for, it's just decorative weaving. But to women who've learned the code, every pattern is a message. Every color combination is intelligence. The men fight their wars. The women ensure their families survive those wars. And nobody writes this down. Nobody celebrates it. But it's happening constantly across the entire Viking world. Now, let's talk economics, because the numbers here are genuinely impressive. A single clean spring, properly managed, can support 8 families. That's the baseline. But by 950 after Christ, Viking women have figured out how to stretch that to 12 families through pure innovation. Elaborate scheduling systems, different families draw water at different times. Seasonal rotation, heavier use in summer when natural rain provides backup. Lighter use in winter when every drop counts. And storage methods that would impress modern engineers. They discover that water stored in chambers lined with specific types of moss stays fresh for 3 months. 3 months? How did they figure this out? Trial and error over generations. Somebody noticed that water stored near certain mosses didn't go bad. Somebody else experimented with lining containers with those mosses. Somebody refined the technique, and now it's standard practice. They learned that adding heated stones to questionable water sources can purify them. We'd call this pasteurization today. They called it the fire treatment. Same result. And here's one that really gets me. Certain bark strips can detect poison. If you put specific types of bark in water and they change color, the water's not safe. Is this chemistry? Is this magic? From their perspective, does it matter? It works. That's what counts. This knowledge becomes currency, real, tradable currency. Women trade water wisdom for imported goods. For marriage prospects, your daughter wants to marry into that wealthy family? Better teach them about your family's secret spring. For protection agreements that completely bypass the male-dominated legal system, a powerful family owes your family a water debt? That's leverage. That's security. That's power. And the thing is, the men barely notice. Oh, they notice when they're thirsty and there's clean water. They notice when their families are healthy while neighboring settlements are dealing with waterborne illness. But they don't understand the systems that make it possible. They don't see the negotiations, the alliances, the careful diplomacy that happens every single day at every single water source across Scandinavia. By the time Christianity starts making serious inroads into Scandinavia, and we're talking late 10th century now, these systems are so sophisticated, so entrenched, that they'll survive the conversion. They'll adapt. They'll persist. Because while religion might change, and while politics might shift, people still need clean water. And the women who control the water, they're just getting started. 1010 after Christ. And across Scandinavia, people are saying this is the harshest winter in living memory. The kind of winter where the old people talk about their grandparents' stories of similar cold, trying to find some precedent, some reassurance that yes, people can survive this. The snow doesn't just fall, it accumulates. Rivers freeze solid enough to ride horses across. The sea ice extends so far that some people joke nervously that you could walk to England if you were stupid enough to try. But here's the thing about Viking women. By 1010, they've had 2 centuries to perfect winter survival. 200 years of refinement, experimentation, failure, and success. And nowhere is this more evident than in Iceland, where a woman named Freydis Waterkeeper is about to revolutionize how an entire society thinks about winter water. Iceland. Let that sink in. You're living on a volcanic island in the North Atlantic, where winter means months of near-total darkness and cold that makes mainland Scandinavia look mild by comparison. Every single drop of water you drink in winter has to be melted from snow or ice. And Freydis has done something remarkable. She's calculated exactly how much wood it takes to melt enough snow for one person's daily needs. 7 pounds of kindling, just for drinking water. Not cooking, not washing, just staying hydrated. 7 pounds of wood per person per day in a place where trees are scarce and precious. Think about that math for a moment. A family of 6 needs 42 pounds of wood daily just for drinking water. Over a 5-month winter, that's more than 3 tons of wood, and we haven't even started cooking or heating the house. This is unsustainable. This is literally burning through Iceland's limited forest resources. And Freydis, staring at her dwindling woodpile in the middle of this brutal winter, has an insight that's going to change everything. What if we share the fire? Now, that sounds simple, right? But think about Viking culture. These are individual family units, individual longhouses, individual resources. You don't share core survival infrastructure. That's not how things are done. Except Freydis doesn't care how things are done. She cares about her children freezing to death, and she cares about running out of wood in February with 2 more months of winter ahead. She proposes communal melting halls. And when I say she proposes this, I mean she basically forces it to happen. She goes to 19 other families and she runs the numbers for them. You're going to run out of wood. I'm going to run out of wood. We're all going to run out of wood unless we do something different. But if we pool our resources, if we build one massive fire in a shared space, we can reduce wood use by 60%. 60%! How? Basic thermodynamics. One huge fire is far more efficient than 20 small fires. And beyond the fuel savings, something unexpected happens. These communal melting halls become social centers. Women gather there to spin, to weave, to plan, to share information, while snow transforms to water in huge suspended cauldrons, and we're talking cauldrons that hold 30, 40 gallons. Women are building social networks, maintaining alliances, teaching daughters not just water gathering, but politics, economics, and community management. The melting halls spread across Iceland within 5 years, and from Iceland the concept travels back to Greenland, to the Faroe Islands, even to mainland Scandinavia, where wood is less scarce but efficiency is always valued. But Freydis isn't done innovating. 1012 after Christ, a plague hits. We don't know exactly what disease, the sagas aren't clear, and medical specificity isn't their strong point. What we do know, it causes severe diarrhea, vomiting, and death. It's killed 40 people in Freydis's region, 40 souls, in communities where every person matters. And Freydis notices something. The illness spreads through some families, but not others. Some water sources seem connected to the sickness, others don't. She starts experimenting. And I need you to understand how radical this is. This is systematic testing in 1012. This is the scientific method being applied by a woman who's never heard the term scientific method, who doesn't know what bacteria are, who has no conception of germ theory, but she knows that something in the water is making people sick, and she's determined to figure out what. She tries filtering water through different materials. Cloth doesn't help. Woven grass doesn't help. Then she tries layers of birch bark with sand and crushed charcoal from specific woods. And something happens. Water that comes out of her makeshift filter is clearer. It tastes cleaner. And most importantly, people who drink it don't get sick. Freydis doesn't know she's invented a basic form of activated charcoal filtration. She doesn't know that the layers of bark, sand, and specific charcoals are actually trapping pathogens and organic contaminants. She just knows it works. The water that comes through her birch bark cones is somehow safer than what nature provides. Word spreads. Women travel from settlements across Greenland, a journey of weeks in these conditions, to learn her technique. They pay in walrus ivory, in Arctic fox pelts, in precious imported goods, because what Freydis is selling is more valuable than gold. She's selling survival. She's selling a way to keep children alive during outbreaks. And here's what really impresses me. Within a generation, every major Scandinavian settlement has adopted some version of Freydis's filtration system. Women are trading variations on the technique, improving it, adapting it to local resources. Some use different types of bark. Some experiment with clay layers. Some add crushed limestone. It's open source technology, 1100 years before that term exists. By the middle of the 11th century, Viking women have developed tools as specialized as any warrior's weapons. They have lightweight ceramic vessels that test water purity by changing color, probably reacting to pH changes or mineral content, though they don't think in those terms. They have collection cloths that filter rainwater, while simultaneously adding medicinal herbs, dual-purpose tools that are brilliant in their simplicity. And they have elaborate pulley systems that allow one woman to haul 200 pounds of water up cliff faces to hillfort settlements. 200 pounds, up a cliff, using nothing but rope, wood, and understanding of mechanical advantage. Show me the warrior who could do that. They've learned to read the land like runes, where limestone naturally sweetens water. Where iron deposits turn it red but harmless, they call it troll blood water, but they know it's safe to drink. Where underground streams surface just enough to tap without digging. In the Orkney Islands, women have mapped tidal pools that freshen with rain, creating reliable water sources that confuse visiting traders who can't understand how settlements thrive where no rivers run. This is mastery. This is taking one of humanity's most basic needs and solving it in the harshest conditions on Earth. And here's the kicker. Most of these women still can't read or write. This knowledge exists entirely in oral tradition, in practical demonstration, in mother teaching, daughter teaching granddaughter. No written manuals, no textbooks, just centuries of accumulated wisdom passed through bloodlines and bonds of community. The Viking Age is about to end within a generation. Harald Hardrada will die at Stamford Bridge, and historians will mark that as the closing chapter. But what these women have built, that's just getting started. 1066 after Christ. And everything's changing. Harald Hardrada is dead at Stamford Bridge. William of Normandy himself, descended from Vikings, is conquering England. The Viking Age, as historians will later define it, is over, and Christianity is spreading across Scandinavia like meltwater in spring, bringing with it monks, monasteries, and Mediterranean knowledge. These monks arrive expecting to teach. They bring Roman engineering. They bring knowledge of well-digging techniques that have been refined over 1,000 years of Mediterranean civilization. They bring understanding of aqueducts that once supplied Rome itself. And they look at these northern settlements without wells, without aqueducts, without any of the infrastructure that defines civilized water management, and they think, oh, these poor people. We'll show them how it's done. Here's what happens instead. They learn. Because the monks, for all their knowledge, have never dealt with conditions like this. Roman wells, they freeze solid in Scandinavian winters. Water expands when it freezes. Every schoolchild knows that now. And when it expands inside a stone well shaft, it cracks. Come spring, your well is destroyed. You start over, or you give up. Aqueducts? Even worse. Any standing water in an aqueduct channel freezes, expands, and shatters the structure. The Romans built some of history's most impressive waterworks, but they built them in the Mediterranean. None of that engineering survives transplantation to the Arctic Circle. So the wise abbots, and there were wise ones, make no mistake, start talking to local women. They start asking questions. How do you find water in winter? How do you keep it clean? How do you store it? And these monks, trained in observation and documentation, start writing down what Viking women have known for generations. The really fascinating thing? The monks don't just copy the techniques, they add to them. They incorporate Christian prayers into the old water rituals. Where Astrid once prayed to Ran, now women pray to St. Nicholas, patron saint of waters, but the ritual structure remains identical. Offerings at springs shift from bread and silver to bread and Christian medallions. But the practice of leaving offerings continues. It's a hybrid system, blending pagan wisdom with Christian theology, and it works. It works so well that these methods continue serving northern communities for 5 more centuries. Let's talk numbers, because the numbers tell a story that contemporary accounts often miss. Viking women's water management systems required 40% less labor than contemporary well digging. 40%. Yes, you had to walk to the water source. Yes, you had to carry heavy loads. But consider the alternative: digging and maintaining wells in permafrost, hauling out broken stones when your well shaft collapses, dealing with freezing and contamination. The labor investment in a reliable well network in these conditions would have been massive. Viking women's approach, work with nature, find what's already there, was simply more efficient for the environment. Their understanding of natural filtration preceded scientific germ theory by 800 years. Think about that. Freydis designed her birch bark filters in 1012. Louis Pasteur published his germ theory in 1861. That's a 749-year gap, and yet both systems worked, because you don't need to understand the mechanism to observe the results. The communal water sharing agreements that women like Ingrid maintained became templates for medieval Scandinavian water rights laws. When Christian kingdoms started codifying legal systems in the 12th and 13th centuries, they looked at existing practices, and what they found were sophisticated resource-sharing agreements that had been operating successfully for hundreds of years. Those agreements got written into law, and they're still echoed in modern Nordic resource management. When you look at how Norway, Sweden, and Iceland handle common resources today, the emphasis on communal access, balanced with individual responsibility, you're seeing traditions that began with women sharing the burden of water collection 1,200 years ago. When archaeologists excavate Viking settlements today, they find the remains: sophisticated water storage systems carved into bedrock, filtering stations with layers of sand and charcoal still in place, distribution networks showing careful planning and community coordination. And these aren't secondary features, they're as integral to settlement layout as defensive walls or longhouses. The archaeologists can trace water routes, identify collection points, map the entire infrastructure. What they're seeing is evidence of engineering that's as complex as any military campaign, but its architects left no written records. Because here's the thing about Viking women's waterwork. It wasn't glorious. Nobody composed sagas about Astrid's daily walk to the spring. No skald sang of Gudrun's water negotiations. Freydis's inventions didn't get carved into runestones. This was daily labour, invisible labour, the kind of work that societies depend on but rarely celebrate. The men got ships named after them. The women got what? Survival, healthy children, communities that didn't die of thirst or disease. But the deeper legacy? That lives on. Scandinavian grandmothers still teach children to respect running water. Not with prayers to Ran anymore, but the sentiment is identical. Water gives life. Water demands respect. Norwegian hiking culture carries forward the knowledge of reading safe springs. Experienced hikers can spot reliable water sources using observations that Astrid would recognize instantly. The specifics of birdsong have changed. Bird populations shift over centuries, but the principle remains. Read the landscape, watch for signs, don't trust water just because it looks clear. Icelandic communities maintain communal approaches to natural resources that began with Freydis's melting halls. The emphasis on collective action while respecting individual contribution, the willingness to pool resources during crisis, the understanding that community survival sometimes requires setting aside traditional individualism. These aren't abstract values. They're practical lessons learned by women who had to cooperate or watch their children die. The Viking women who conquered thirst without wells left no sagas in their own names. We don't know most of their names at all. What we have are glimpses. Astrid and Thora at dawn, Gudrun and her iron kettles, Freydis and her birch bark filters. These might be real names, might be composites, might be legend. It doesn't matter. What matters is what they represent. Generations of women who solved one of humanity's fundamental challenges through observation, experimentation, cooperation, and sheer determination. Their innovations flow through time like the streams they so carefully tended. Every time a modern engineer designs a water filtration system, they're following principles that Freydis worked out with birch bark and charcoal. Every time a community comes together to manage a shared resource, they're echoing agreements that Ingrid maintained in her memory. Every time someone teaches a child to read the landscape for water, they're passing on knowledge that Astrid carried in her yew-pole. This is the legacy, not bronze monuments or written histories, but living tradition. Practical wisdom embedded so deeply in culture that it's become invisible. The best technologies are the ones we take for granted, the ones that work so well we forget they were ever invented. Clean water, reliable supply, community cooperation. These aren't accidents, they're achievements. Survival's greatest victories often come not from sword edges, but from the patient wisdom of those who sustain life while others seek glory. The warriors got their names in history books. The women got something better. They got the future. They got children who survived. They got communities that thrived. They got methods that outlasted empires. 800 years after Astrid walked to the sacred spring with her daughter, the spring still runs. The methods have evolved. The prayers have changed. The technology has advanced beyond anything Viking women could have imagined. But the core truth remains. Water is life, and those who master water master survival itself. That's the story. That's the legacy. Not conquest, but conservation. Not glory, but endurance. Not the loud victories that get sung in mead halls, but the quiet triumphs that echo through generations. And somewhere in modern Scandinavia, a grandmother is teaching her granddaughter which springs run pure. The names have changed. The gods have changed. But the knowledge flows on, clean and cold and eternal as the waters these women learned to read so long ago.